We're now joined by Dan Perry. He is a world affairs analyst and he joins us live from Tel Aviv in Israel. Thank you very much, Dan, for joining us here on the programme. Dan, what are your thoughts of the words of Marco Rubio here, backing Qatar very much to stay as the mediator in this conflict, even after it was bombed by the IDF, and also, of course, after a direct visit and a direct meeting with Netanyahu, and just after Qatar condemned the strikes from the Israeli government?
To go back to business as usual, or at least a status quo ante last missile strike, and they continue to remain unclear about whether the U.S. really knew or didn't know, approved or didn't approve, is really offended or is not offended. It remains completely unclear, and many of us are highly skeptical that Israel would have struck Qatar with a missile had the U.S. not approved, even though the U.S. claims otherwise right now. You would think if the U.S. were telling the truth about how Israel caught them by surprise, then Netanyahu would have been in for a lot of criticism by Rubio when it came to Israel, but that did not come to pass. What did come to pass is the U.S. forcing Netanyahu to sort of, knees bent, schoolboy in the corner, say it was all my idea and I did it on my own. But that was it. That's it. And there's no price to be paid for Israel as far as I can tell. Nor is Israel particularly damaged by the result of the conference in Doha on Sunday and especially yesterday, which was a summit where all of Israel's Arab allies joined Qatar in condemning the action and making threats like that it threatens the future of peace and things like that, but nothing particularly concrete. So it sort of looks like Israel got away with it for the moment. I could be wrong, but
Dan,
that's what appears to be the case.
Dan, do you mind if apologies for interrupting you just a second. Let's talk a bit about the Qatar's role and, of course, the US's role. They're both mediators in this conflict. However, Rubio just declared unwavering support for Israel. Qatar says it's going to carry on as a mediator in this conflict. Is there a way forward for diplomacy with mediators like this?
Well, the U.S. is not, but both are kind of mediators, but both are implicated because, the U.S. is obviously a staunch ally of Israel and an implacable enemy of Hamas, as I believe is most of the planet, to various degrees, whether they admit it or not. Qatar, meanwhile, it has been a patron of Hamas and has been a funder of the larger Muslim Brotherhood movement that is at loggerheads with much of the Sunni Arab world and is considered a terrorist organization in Egypt. So we're talking about implicated parties that nonetheless want to play a constructive role. And I do believe at this point, the question on everyone's minds, including Qatar, is how to bring about a situation where Hamas does in effect surrender and does in effect disarm. This may surprise some viewers, but Qatar joined the Arab League in the New York Declaration from July, calling on Hamas to disarm. And if Hamas did agree to disarm and hand over the Strip to another government, they would not only be doing what is undoubtedly the will of the overwhelming majority of the Gazan people, but they would end the war. Now, I have been highly critical of Israel's insistence on continuing the war because I do not think Hamas is going to do any such thing, and I think there are better ways to compel that outcome. But the outcome is desired by everyone, and especially and surprisingly, given the history, Qatar. So we have a complex and delicate situation here, where the Gaza Strip is being held hostage by what is now a fairly small group of truly engaged terrorists, with a lot of insurgents that they've recruited who are like 15 or 16 years old in the past 2 years to replace their fighters who've been killed.
Dan, many are arguing here that Israel broke international law by striking Qatar, a sovereign nation. Do you expect Israel to face any consequences either at the UN or from any other body in regards to this?
Israel won't face consequences at the UN because truly consequential actions at the UN occur from the UN Security Council, where the U.S. can be expected to veto any anti-Israel measure. Israel could potentially face other consequences if Arab countries should break off relations or should suspend trade deals or things of this nature. Also, Europe is getting a little bit tired of Israel's continued insistence on fighting the war in this way. And just last week, the Ursula von der Leyen threatened to take measures against Israel and to maybe even ultimately expel Israel from its status as an associate member of the European Union. For sure, Israel can face consequences, but I don't think it will be purely about the strike in Qatar. The strike in Qatar was undoubtedly a violation of Qatar's sovereignty. That's obvious. But the notion that one never violates another's sovereignty is a little bit infantile. I mean, when the U.S. Took out Osama bin Laden, who was in Pakistan, another erstwhile U.S. ally, that was a violation of Pakistan's sovereignty. But Osama bin Laden was a demonic terrorist responsible for 9/11. The leaders of Hamas are genocidal jihadist mafia. So the idea that you host them and they have impunity because your sovereignty prevails is an idea, but it's not the only idea in the world. So whereas for sure Qatar's sovereignty was absolutely violated, and you could argue that it also violated the fuzzy and highly subjective edifice of international law. The real issue is political. What's really supposed to happen here? How to end the war? Who cares enough about what? Does Qatar really care enough to cut off relations with Israel, which it has, and beneath the surface are pretty good? My guess is actually not.
Yes, do stay with us, Dan, as we further discuss the conflict and we move over to the ground.
Beneath the surface are pretty good? My guess is actually not.
Yes, do stay with us, Dan, as we
absolutely violated. And you could argue that it also violated the fuzzy and highly subjective edifice of international law. The real issue is political. What's really supposed to happen here? How to end the war? Who cares enough about what? Does Qatar really care enough to cut off relations with Israel, which it has, and beneath the surface are pretty good? My guess is actually not.
Let's focus on this new offensive, which we are seeing continuing throughout the day. Israel has said that it estimates that 2,000 to 3,000 Hamas terrorists, as it calls them, remain in Gaza, justifying this new ground offensive. Where does Israel get these numbers from? And does these numbers support the scale of bombardment and displacement that we're seeing?
Israel has fairly good intelligence all over the Gaza Strip, and the nature of that intelligence obviously is human and SIGINT, and these are complex issues and somewhat confidential. I believe their numbers. Whether it supports the scale of the offensive is another question altogether, and it's very subjective and very political. You must know that the idea of continuing the war in Gaza and moving on the ground into Gaza City at this time is opposed by the security establishment in Israel, the National Security Council in Israel, the overwhelming tech, business, strategic, academic, and journalistic community in Israel, and the population of Israel. So the government here is forcing the army to do something extremely unpopular. And the reason they're doing it is an open question. They can always say, well, Hamas has not yet been fully eradicated. And that's true. They haven't. But that argument could, sustain a continued forever war for many, many years into the future. These terrorist organizations, and they are terrorists, and they've hijacked the Gaza population, and it's a catastrophe that they've been allowed to flower.
Yeah.
They're very difficult to stamp out. The Americans never did stamp out the insurgency in Iraq. It just mutated into the Iraqi Shia militias that we see today, and they basically were completely failed. They failed completely in Afghanistan, and no one has succeeded in eradicating the Houthis in Yemen because it's so easy to hide arms, to get arms, and to pay children a few dollars to become militants, and that can be expected to continue in Gaza for some time. Moreover, Israel's made clear that they're allowing Hamas terrorists to flee the city along with the population. So all this really is going to do is saddle Israel with a direct occupation over close to 1 million people because most of the population of Gaza hasn't fled, who can be trusted to be hostile, among whom there will be insurgents, and there will be constant booby-trapping of buildings and firefights with insurgents and explosives going off, and commando operations and civilians dying and hostages dying and soldiers dying. For what end? Because Israel, because of the radioactive idiocy of the current government of Israel, has refused to even discuss one time what should come after Hamas in Gaza, which is obviously the Palestinian Authority backed by the world with all kinds of reforms and so forth. They've refused to articulate it because the far right and the Israeli government won't allow it. So what this is leading to is an Israeli military administration over so many people that will be costly and deadly and achieve nothing. So quite apart from whether it's justified by the existence of 2,000 terrorists, is a wider question of Israel's complete lack of strategy.
Dan Perry, thank you very much for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you on the programme.